Hello everybody, today we have Elżbieta Korolczuk with us. She is both an academic, a scholar, and I would say public intellectual. As a sociologist, she works at the university in Stockholm and teaches also in the American Studies Center at the Warsaw University. Her research interests involve social movements, civil society, and gender, and we will hear about this today. To her most recent publications belong two edited volumes, one on civil society revisited, Lessons from Poland in 2017, it's published with Berkhan's books, and Rebellious Parents, about the new father and parents movements, conservative father and parents movements in Russia, in Poland, and other post-socialist countries, and we have it in our library, I can admit. She did a lot research on gender and conservatism. I think one of the papers I like very much, and is also part of my teaching, is the paper together with Agnieszka Graf on gender as Ebola from Brussels. But she also wrote a paper which is in a volume on Wars and Communism and Nazism put together, War on Gender in Poland. And I think this will be the context we will hear about today more. As a public intellectual, she is also somehow a journalist or working as commentator, as an activist on human rights and women's rights, and also is, I think, you publish regularly in journals and newspapers, including the liberal daily Gazeta Wyborcza. Thank you very much for being here with us, and we are looking forward to your lecture.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks to Katarina Blum for having me here, and thank you all for coming. And I started looking at these anti-gender mobilizations around 2012. And at the beginning, I had this feeling like, well, it's a bit crazy. And since I'm from Poland, I know all types of ultra-conservative crazy, as you can imagine. But after a while, I started to meet with people. There has been conferences and workshops, and everybody was coming there and saying, like, look at those crazy things happening in our country. This is so country-specific. And around 2014, I realized that this is really something that is far from country-specific. It is a global phenomenon, and actually we have to really look at the connections between ultra-conservative movements and political changes. That this is not just cultural trend, this is also political trend. And this is what I will be talking about today. I will be talking about right-wing populism and its connection to gender. I will be talking about Poland mostly, but I will also give you some examples from other countries which actually show the varieties of those gendered populisms in Europe and beyond. So in recent years, we all saw that gender started to be one of those very problematic issues. It featured prominently on the agenda of right-wing populist parties, and here I have some gentlemen, although not only women are, of course, leading and are members of right-wing populist parties. And in country after country, newly elected politicians attempted to limit women's reproductive rights, as Mr. Kaczyński, undermine the legitimacy of gender studies as a field of scientific inquiry, and or viciously attacking sexual minorities. Contemporary leaders such as Matteo Salvini, who started to kiss the cross recently, but now is out of power, let's see for how long, Bolsonaro and Trump are proud opponents of anti-discriminatory legislation, of gender-sensitive education, and minority and transgender rights. This tendency for promoting ultra-conservative agenda is visible also in countries such as Sweden. Here we have Jimmy Åkesson, a very nice-looking, he always has this bow tie. He's very, well cut and very sleek, I would say. He is the leader of Sverigedemokraterna, the Swedish Democrats, or Sweden's Democrats, party which, in a country where gender equality has become a part of national identity, you would say, before the recent 2018 elections, they actually proposed some law that would actually lower the age for access to abortion. And actually, when you look at their program, there has been several attempts to put limitations in access to abortion here and there. And as I will show later, their spokesperson went on record saying that politicians who should have tighter control over gender studies and race studies because they are overly politicized and unscientific. And these examples show that obviously right-wing populism is gendered, and this is what we have in a public debate. We have this idea that right-wing populists are usually gender conservative. But when we look at it closely, we have to ask the question, how is populism gendered? Is it about ideology? Can we say that just as nationalism is gendered, there is this equivalence with right-wing populism, or populism in general, maybe? What about the origins or the roots of that? Is it the supply side or is it the demand side? Are right-wing populist leaders socially conservative, or do they cater opportunistically to ultra-conservative constituencies? Is it a matter of style? Because obviously populism in general and right-wing populism is differently conceptualized. And then finally, how to make sense of the differences between different countries, because obviously in Poland we have a right-wing populist Law and Justice Party, which launched an anti-gay, anti-LGBT campaign, which is vicious and violent this year. But in Germany, for example, AfD, and in Sweden as well, Sverigedemokraterna do not openly express any homophobic views, and they have actually openly gay people among their leaders and supporters. To complicate it even more, if we look at scholarship, if we look at Muda's and Kaltwasser's analysis of 4 different populist regime, right-wing and left-wing, Western Europe, Latin America, they cannot really find any specific connection between populism and gender. So they conclude that, I quote, "Conceptually, populism has no specific relationship to gender. In fact, gender differences, like all other differences within the people, are considered secondary, if not irrelevant, to populist politics." And their analysis suggests that this is really a matter of the local cultural context. So my question is, are they right, or maybe something happened between the time that they were doing their analysis, which was published in 2015, but which was done before, and maybe we have a new trend which is visible here. So in that sense, I agree with their conclusions about the role of cultural context, but I think that we really have to look closely by what we mean by context. And secondly, we should really take global trends under consideration, since both right-wing populism and ultra-conservative civil society are global phenomena today. So in that sense, I think that this is the type of analysis in which we really look at gender politics of right-wing populists as something not stable and very much sort of intrinsically connected with the ideology, but rather something which can change over time and between context. And there has been a lot of discussions, there are a lot of discussions around right-wing populism, but I think that the definition which sort of won the day was the one which is the ideational definition of populism proposed by scholars such as Kasmuda, who talk about populism as not only a form of doing politics, but of a thin ideology. And the main definitional aspects are the tendency to divide people into two antagonistic camps, the pure elites, the corrupt elites, of course, and the pure people. This is something that very much looks at moral divides between those groups, and which make those differences in a way irreconcilable. And of course, the question is always, if this is a thin ideology, how does it thickens? And nationalism, for example, or racism are those types of ideologies that are usually seen as those which create this process of thickening of right-wing populism. At the same time, I think that it's really worth to look at one of the great scholars of populism, Margaret Canavan, who says that basically opposition of right-wing populist opposition is not only opposition to power holders and hence elites, but also to elite culture. So she says, populism in modern democratic societies is best seen as an appeal to the people against both the established structure of power and the dominant ideas and values of the society. So in that sense, I think that we should really look at the connection between right-wing populist parties in politics and what I call the anti-gender movements. And what are the anti-gender movements today? Let me give you a few vignettes. This is a picture, a photo from 2013, France, in Lyon and in Paris. Over 1 million people went to the streets in protest of so-called Taubira law, which was basically a law which implemented marriage equality for gay couples. They were claiming that this law endangers traditional family and is an effect of liberal familiophobia. This is a rhetoric which echoes throughout all of the context in which this trend has appeared. The second vignette is from São Paulo, Brazil, where huge protests were staged to confront or to oppose Judith Butler, well-known gender scholar's visit to the country. Her effigy was burned on the square. Over 40,000 people protested, signed a petition that she shouldn't be allowed to São Paulo, and she was actually attacked at the airport by a woman who was carrying a sign, probably a sign like this. And sort of funny part here is that she actually went to São Paulo for a conference on democracy. Then here, Sweden. There is a growing critique of gender studies in Sweden, and here is the picture of Robert Stenqvist, who is the spokesperson of SD, as I already mentioned. But there are people also such as Ivar Arpi, who is a journalist at Svenska Dagbladet, one of the main newspapers in Sweden, and he has been really active on this field. He has published several articles claiming that gender studies are like a church in Sweden, and they are they have overwhelming power over university, and that's why we should basically get rid of them, or at least put them under control. And he is publishing a book on that in January or February next year. And basically there are quite a lot of these discussions, and probably you can recognize those arguments because, as Sabine Hark has argued, those ideas that genderism or gender studies are sort of flooding universities is also present in Germany. And she said that it's quite interesting because less than 1% of all professorships in Germany are professorships in gender studies, and still there is this argument that there is too much power in the hands of gender studies professors. And then Poland. In Poland, we had actually 3 phases of the sort of war on gender so far. The first phase focused on opposing the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, which started around 2012. The second one was in 2016, when there was a proposal to put a blanket ban on abortions in Poland. In Poland, abortion is banned today, but there are a few exceptions, and they wanted to get rid of those exceptions. And the third element the third phase is this anti-LGBT campaign, which was launched before this year's elections. And the idea is that the main danger for the Polish nation today is LGBT ideology. And the issues which are continuously on the agenda are sex education and gender studies. Here you have, for example, a picture which I took at the protest against sex education in schools, which, by the way, we don't really have anyway. This year we had also the new law proposal, citizens' law proposal, which would effectively ban introducing any sex education at schools. You can also take a course in gender, anti-gender in fact, if you would like. It doesn't cost much. You can do it online. And of course, there is a lot of activities online. So basically, if we look at those anti-gender mobilization, it is in part a continuation of anti-feminist, anti-LGBT efforts, which started already in the 70s and 80s, but also there is this new wave of opposition to gender equality and democracy, which employs this well-known master frame of gender equality and gay rights as a threat to children, to family, and hence the nation. But this time the focus is on gender ideology, which is basically equated with liberalism, rampant individualism, the demise of family, and in some context also welfare state. So in that sense, it can be interpreted as an ultra-conservative critique of neoliberalism, which equates neoliberalism with liberal democracy. And it's also quite interesting that in this discourse, family and nation become the last frontiers of social solidarity. So there is this appeal to common people, to parents who are afraid of the future, for the future of their children. And of course, it originated in Vatican. It is a religious movement in that sense. There are people from Orthodox Church, ultra-conservative Protestant movements, but at the same time, it is much more today than just a religious movement. And I would like to show you the example of that, because there are new organizations which are involved in this movement. There are, of course, the old ones, anti-choice, for example, sort of homophobic organizations, but also there are new ones, such as parental movements, which are usually conservative, but also organizations highly professionalized, highly bureaucratized, with much broader agenda, which includes sex education, but also new reproductive technologies and family policy. And there is a Polish foundation which is a good example of that. Osteuropa-Institut Foundation is a non-governmental organization established in 2013, highly professionalized, hires mostly lawyers, has strong international connections with both the Agenda Europe network and Congress of Family. But they are also active abroad. For example, they helped to establish a sister organization in Croatia called Vigilare Foundation in order to push for abortion referendum and abortion ban. But also they want to be knowledge producers. They produce reports, expert opinions, providing core arguments used by both the ultra-conservative groups and the right-wing political parties. They engage in strategic litigation, write law proposals, coordinate activities aimed at harassing, for example, progressive NGOs by demanding, for example, all the documentations that they have which came from public funding. And it's quite interesting because they have connections to the Vatican, but they are also trying to really establish a distance from religious language and religious authorities. They really try to say, we are the experts, we are the new type of civil society which represents women's rights, human rights, and family rights. And they really are in connection with other groups and form this alternative or ultra-conservative civil society, which is driven by the desire to challenge sexual revolution, social constructionism, and liberal values such as pluralism, individual freedom, and this choice in the sphere of family and reproduction. And there is a growing process of institutionalization of this movement within states. When I talk to my colleagues who are doing research in Italy and Hungary, it's very obvious. Ordo Iuris, for example, now have 2 people cooperating with them in the Polish Supreme Court. They act as experts in ministries, in different institutions. So in that sense, they're really incorporated within the state structure, although they claim to be independent civil society actors. So we see this growing ideological and organizational affinity between right-wing populists and ultra-conservatives. And gender becomes this key issue here. And if you happen to read anything about the recent expose of the Polish Prime Minister, you can see that this will be continued during the next cadence of the Polish Parliament as well. And how does it work internationally? World Congress of Families, which took place in Verona this year, is a good example of that. I've been there, and it was quite amazing, to be really honest. I mean, there has been like 600 people taking part in the World Congress of Families, but they were really there with this feeling that we are the future of politics in Europe. The main organizer is this nice gentleman over here near to Salvini, which you probably recognized. It's Brian Brown. It's not a new organization. The World Congress of Families has been established in 1997 in the United States, but then it started to really push its agenda mainly to to post-communist countries. So they had their congresses in Moldova, in Hungary, in Poland, and now they finally reached the Western Europe thanks to the support of Salvini. Here you can see not only Salvini, but also his ministers, and also Senator Pilon, who is an ultra-conservative politician as well. And also you had quite a lot of people from all over Europe. For example, the founder of Citizen Go, Antonio Arzuaga, has been there, and Citizen Go is an online platform which mobilizes people for petition drives all over Europe, and now they have over 10 million people who signed up for their online platform. And at the same time, he is the founder of Osteuropa, a very conservative organization in Spain. You might have heard about them because they organized a billboard campaign showing that feminism is actually Hitlerism, and they had a picture of Hitler there with, like, you know, mustache in rainbow colors and stuff like that. And they have, as we know, quite a close tie to ultra-nationalist party Vox. So there is a lot of connections between parties, local leaders, organizations. There were also people representing organized religion. There has been the Catholic Bishop of Verona, representative of the Russian Orthodox Church, and Jim Garlow, who is leader of American Evangelicals. And there were also people representing, as we can imagine, Hungary. There were also a person representing Brazil, and there were also Russian ambassador to the World Congress of Feminists, Alexei Komov. So it's very interesting to see how geopolitics really influences these flows of know-how and cooperation. And the official goal of the meeting was to defend family and children, but the political ramifications were quite obvious, with Salvini himself a big star at the meeting. He really came here and he was really like a rock star on the stage, like, yeah, come on, come with me, we will save the world. So in that sense, it really shows how the transnational cooperation functions and how it facilitates this growing ideological and organizational affinity between right-wing populist and ultra-conservative groups. So if we look at this from the perspective of those organizations, what they get out of it, to make it simple, is, of course, support, money, places like Palazzo in Venice to organize their congress. They see it as the classic opening of the political opportunity structure, right? So they have access to power holders, they have possibility to write laws which would actually be debated in the parliament. But then, of course, the question is, why would a right-wing populist need ultra-conservative agenda, ultra-conservative discourse, and this cooperation? So now I would like for us to dig deeper into this discourse and see how those definitional elements of right-wing populism have been saturated by ultra-conservative language. So one of, as I said, important elements of right-wing populist discourse or ideology, if you will, is to show that the elites are not only powerful but also immoral. They are really evil, and the idea is to spread fear and mobilize people around emotional elements as much as around political programs. So the claim that gender ideology poses a threat to children and family has become, as I said, one of the central elements of those anti-gender campaigns, and those images of crying, scared children who are harassed by gay men, basically, are overwhelmingly present online and in promotional materials. And of course, it works especially when it is targeted to parents of young children who are worried about cultural changes, such as easy access to online pornography and changing landscape of sexual behaviors. The right-wing populists, in turn, eagerly adopted this language of moral panic to show that the cultural elites are immoral and dangerous. And it's quite interesting how it connected, for example, with the, in 2015 in Poland, for example, but in other countries it is also visible, how it is connected to the question of migration. In right-wing media and public utterances of populist politicians, refugees, routinely referred to as invaders and terrorists, were demonized as enemies of the nation. And the focus was mostly on male immigrants from Muslim countries, presented as a threat to our women who are supposedly to be raped by racialized, hypermasculine others. And in this context appear genderists and feminists as those who open the gates to for those barbarian and rapists to the country. So gender ideology is portrayed as a tool of cultural and demographic catastrophe. So the idea is that genderists make men soft and not really masculine enough to defend their country. And of course, with all women feminists, there will be not enough white babies to oppose this influx of brown and black barbarians. This is how this idea is constructed. And of course, this rhetoric is very well expressed here. This is the cover of the right-wing Polish magazine from 2016, which says, Islamic rape on Europe, our report on what media and Brussels elites hide from the citizens of the Union. So the idea is that genderists are part of those elites who hide the real dangers connected to immigration and the refugee crisis in order to actually get power and to conquer Poland. And there is, of course, this difference between discourse about migration and gender in countries such as Poland and countries such as Germany or Scandinavian countries, because in the Polish context, there is this obvious idea that this is Mr. Lisicki, who is a right-wing journalist, and he says, both Islam and LGBT movements want to conquer the world. So actually the West has only two options now, homeland or caliphate. So basically the idea is that these two movements are analogous in terms of their need to conquest the world, and the only thing that we can do is to defend normalcy, normal families, defend women and children from this horrible future. Another element is this tendency of right-wing populism to create, to mobilize fear by constructing scapegoats, and victim-perpetrator reversal is an important part of this process. And Ruth Wodak has shown this very eloquently in her seminal book from 2015, but obviously with this development, it is also very clear. So there is this tendency to scapegoat minorities that has been already marginalized and discriminated against in a country. And in the Polish context, where we have virtually no minorities in terms of ethnicity or race, here the key element has been sexuality. So the campaign, which started around 2019, one in which the word gender ideology has been largely replaced by LGBT ideology, was initiated by Law and Justice Party in an effort to basically win the electoral campaign and also discredit their oppositional party, whose representatives have recently, at the beginning of the year, signed LGBT card for, he is a Warsaw mayor, and he signed this card, which basically includes things like we should have anti-discriminatory education in public schools, right? So the thing is that the cultural script, the language and basic claims of this campaign have already been prepared and promoted by anti-gender actors, and they could be easily activated. The central element, of course, of this narrative is that gay men are pedophiles, and hence the rights of sexual minorities pave the way for moral corruption of children. And in contemporary populist discourse, the other is routinely portrayed as foreign and alien. Anton Pelinka, another well-known scholar of right-wing populism, observes that populist anti-elitism today is directed against those who seem to be responsible for Europeanization and globalization, and especially for mass migration. And this is very clear in the Polish context, where you have the idea that West is now so corrupted that actually we have to save you from your own degenerate ways. So here we come, on our white horses. And in that sense, there are also connections to the communist past to show, mainly through the idea of cultural Marxism, that it is actually both, something that comes from the past, which we finally freed ourselves from, meaning communism, and this is something that comes from the West, which actually becomes so corrupted due to sexual revolution and political correctness that now we are those who actually remain sane and normal sort of the last man standing. And this is very well expressed in the words of the Polish Archbishop Marek Jędraszewski, who said, "The Red Plague no longer walks our land, but there is a new one that wants to dominate our souls, hearts, and minds. It is no longer the Red Plague, it is a rainbow one." So this, by adopting this anti-gender, anti-LGBT rhetoric, right-wing populists managed to present marginalized group, which in the Polish society is the LGBT community, as dangerous, powerful and ruthless. And of course, the idea is that they take money and support from the West. And the Berlin parades are always shown in online films or in documentaries, not really saying that this is from Berlin or from other country. The idea is that if you have naked men in skins, this is the degenerate West that we want to avoid. So the idea is that by this reversal, you can really legitimize violence, even outright violence. This year in city of Białystok, which is my home city in Poland, the Equality March has been attacked by ultra right-wing groups, and several people had to be hospitalized. Several people have been injured. Gas has been used to at least save some of the people from violence. So if you look at this kind of discourse, this really helps to legitimize not only discursive violence, but also direct violence as self-defense of people, common people who want to avoid corruption and the violence which is allegedly produced by genderists and LGBT promoters. So in Western countries, the main enemy, if you will, is the migrant or refugee who endangers women's and gay rights. So this is this homo-nationalist or femo-nationalist discourse which constructs the main division between enlightened us and the barbarian others. But of course the goal is similar, to show the elites who are allowing for migration, who are allowing for the development of gender equality policies as reckless at best and dangerous and cunning at worst. Finally, there is this question of who are we? Who are the people that we want to protect? Who do we identify with? And this process of reconstructing social polarization is actually enabled by two important changes. On the one hand, the ultra-conservative organizations have not only adopted this master frame of we have to support the family and protect the children, but also they started to portray themselves as those who promote pro-family policies, who are experts in social policies, who are the protectors of the welfare state. And this is very strong in the Swedish context. This is, for example, the cartoon from the SD Facebook site, and this is the rose for Social Democratic Party, which is in power in Sweden now. And this is a sort of the dragon which says, we don't have any more money, we don't have money for you, because those went for this mass migration, gender and other stuff. So the idea is that the right-wing populist parties are the only protectors of the welfare state, which has been crumbling. And this is a very different construct comparing to the classical neocons, neoliberals in the US context. And I think that these differences has to be taken under consideration. So there is this clear departure from neoliberal orientation, at least. And at the same time, you see a connection between those two, because obviously having those ultra-conservative organizations as experts who are proposing specific types of pro-family regulations fits very well with the self-portrayal of right-wing populist parties as defenders of common people, of hard-working families. And my last words. Basically, scholars examining anti-gender campaigns either focused on the broader trend of illiberalism and focused on this, claiming that populism is part of that, along with anti-pluralism and ideological monism, or such as David Paternotte and Roman Kuchar call for or against conflating the two, saying that we have to disentangle those two groups and those two ideological trends. And I very much agree with them, although I think that we should exactly look at those moments of entanglement to understand how right-wing populism is being saturated with, or how it thickens through growing affinity, organizational and ideological, with ultra-conservative movements. So in that sense, this intensification of opposition to gender equality, which actually happened before this wave of right-wing populist strengthened or came to power in many European countries, provided favorable discursive opportunities for such parties to spread fear, to scapegoat specific groups, and to deepen social polarization by showing or constructing this moral boundary between the elites and the people. And what is really important here also is that, well, the key element which enables this ideological thickening of populism is the internal logic of anti-gender discourse, which is in fact not a religious, but a populist logic. So it is no longer, its core element is no longer obedience to God, but rather a rebellion against godless elites, intellectual, political, and economic, that allegedly oppress common people and hijacked true democracy. Thank you so much. That would be the end.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And now the floor is open for question, discussion. Yeah, who wants to first to raise a question or challenge her? Yeah, please.
Thank you, very interesting. You said that this kind of discourse originated in the Vatican. Do you think it would have also developed that strongly as a populist movement and as a discourse in general on politics if that origin was not given?
Maybe we can gather some questions if there are more. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned the transnational links between those locally organized groups. And I would like to know from you how these groups in different countries deal with the flaws or paradoxes or positions within the movement. So for instance, in some Western European countries, anti-migration movements also have a part of an element in being against migration, for example, from Poland to Western European countries. Mm-hmm. And of course that might be difficult to communicate or difficult to tell people from Poland, but just as one example. Or in the so-called homo nationalism, the idea would be that homosexuality is one part of the national identity, which needs to be defended against Islamization, whereas, as I understood from you in Poland, it would be so that Islamization and the LGBT movement are kind of part of the same evil ideology. So there's some kind of logical flaws in this, and how did this movement deal with this? Because I imagine if you have such an international congress, people come with really different backgrounds, and maybe they do not agree with each other, but yeah, I would be very interested in this. And then I would like to know from you, second question, if I may. So you present, and I think it was very interesting to you present how this rhetoric is working. And I would be very keen to know more about the underlying reasons why some of these rhetorics work and become very successful and dominant in the discourse, and others not so much. So what is exactly so appealing to them? Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that's already enough for
Yeah.
the first round.
The first question about the Vatican, I think that really it would probably emerge, or from the other side. If you think about how this discussion about, or this rhetoric of family protection developed, it actually developed simultaneously in Europe, mostly within religious circles, but also internationally and in the United States. And Russia, of course. And we, of course, quote your work on that in our article. So in that sense, there is quite interesting overlap between those different rhetorics and groups which are coming from different contexts and countries. And I think that Vatican is a very powerful political actor. So in that sense, it really works as a institution which spreads specific types of rhetoric and also has power to introduce specific policies or specific types of talking about issues on international arenas, such as the UN, right? United Nations is an arena where Vatican is very active and tries to really push for specific types of conceptualization of women's rights, for example. So they were opposing the idea of gender very early on. And in that sense, I guess it would be more difficult to have such a wide spread of this ideology, or at least this rhetoric, without Vatican's power as an international institution. Does it answer your question? How do they, very interesting question about how they work with their differences. One general answer to that is every ideology is not coherent in a sense, right? And a good story is always ambiguous. It always has, I mean, this ambiguity really allows different people to cherry pick elements which they can identify with. But also they are very strategically able to downplay certain elements of their ideology at specific fora. So for example, at Verona, they were talking about family and they were praising those wonderful pro-family legislation in Poland, like 500 plus, or in Hungary, where we have special programs for big families to buy a car or a bigger apartment. And I was listening to that coming from an American guy, and I was thinking like, so why don't you fight for having at least maternal leave, universal maternal leave in your own country? And it's like, where is the logic in that? If you think that this is so important to support family and have pro-family legislation, why aren't you doing this in United States, where his organization, the Brian Brown organization, is basically the main issue that they are working with is to oppose marriage equality. So this is how they define protecting family in their own context, and there's a huge difference in the ways in which they talk about it in the European context. But then also Andrea Petto and other scholars talked, Weronika Grzebalska, for example, talked about gender as a symbolic glue. So gender, in a way, is like a floating signifier which can be used and has been used to connect groups from ultra-conservative groups from different countries, like for example, nationalist groups and parties. And as you can imagine, there is not so much that Polish nationalists have with German nationalists, right? Except for the fact that they can see migration as a great threat, and they can agree around the fact that we should have more white babies. Henceforth, we should have more families, we should support financially also Polish families, we should have, you know, women in their more or less traditional place. And of course, they will downplay specific elements of this ideology in different contexts, but there is a space for negotiations here, right? But of course, there are also differences, because in Verona, Poland was not represented. And when I asked Brown why is that, he said like, oh, I've invited them, I don't know why didn't they come. And I guess partly it was because of the issue of migration and the question of, you know, whether Italy and Poland within the European Union have the same interests, because obviously Italy wants to have migrants relocated within European Union, whereas Poland says no way. But maybe it was because of the Russian money, which is very much connected to this transnational organization. Nobody knows how much, but obviously there are some, probably quite a lot. And then, of course, the question is to what extent, for example, Polish organizations can be seen as connected to those which are then connected to Russian money. So then this is a geopolitical element here, which makes it more complicated. But obviously, they have to really work around those differences. And then sort of, it was very interesting in Verona when one of those, I think Jim Garlow said that the hellfire will burn the homosexuals. And the next day, they issued an official statement saying that they are not homophobes, and any homophobic language there will be absolutely not accepted. So there is a great effort to mainstream their agenda at this kind of events, which has a lot of media coverage. So there's a lot of strategic working here. And then why is this rhetoric working? I think for many reasons. And one reason is that I think that feminists failed in a way in which feminism has become very much connected to gender mainstreaming, workplace pay differences, and we really abandoned the question of family and how family has become really, for many people, the last frontier of social solidarity and protection from the market. So in that sense, family is a space in which we can reach privacy, we can achieve different types of connections than those which are really required in, well, neoliberal world, so to speak. So in that sense, I think that we didn't do, and I said we because I have been involved in this movement for quite a long time. And actually, even for me, when I started, for example, working with single mothers associations and started to write about motherhood and so on, it was quite difficult to sort of push this agenda within the women's movement, right? Because obviously in Poland, with the question of abortion, we have so much opposition and so many issues around that we streamline our work in this specific arena, and then it's very difficult to connect to women who actually want to be mothers, want to have children, and how to fight for specific types of solutions there. But I also think that basically what right-wing populists do very efficiently is to harness fear. And fear is something that I guess it's a sort of sign of our times. And it doesn't mean that only ultra-conservatists or right-wing populists produce fear. Because obviously, for example, if we think about environmental movements, they are using fear for quite many years to make us really afraid of the future of our climate in order to make us more prone to do something about it, right? But obviously, on the individual level, if you have so much anxiety about the future, so much fear, so much emotional instability, then obviously you have to have ways in which you create community, in which you create sense of stability, in which you make people feel safe. And I think that, liberal democracy haven't been doing great job in this respect, right? And I guess the connection of neoliberalism, not only as free market philosophy, but also as ideology of rampant individualism and this sense of disconnection from others, together with the inability of progressive movements to create a sense of togetherness, produces a gap, a space into which it is very easy to come and occupy this space.
Second round.
I would just like to return to the workfulness of families, and you have mentioned that the Bishop of Verona was present at this event, and I just followed a bit about the aftermath of and the media discourse surrounding this event, and I have noticed that at least in Italy it was quite a controversial event for Catholic people or the Catholic Church, and there were voices condemning it, that this is not, like, what they do is not quite aligned to the discourse or like the position of the Catholic Church on families, and that this is a political exploitation. I'm not sure if you have noticed it there, or such, at least on, I don't know if the Bishop of Verona was speaking there, or that from other, let's say, church-related people present.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find your idea of ultra-conservatism as I think you said, the last bastion, or the last, the last bastion of social solidarity, the last cell or entity. I find it very intriguing, and I was thinking maybe you can reflect a little bit on how far there's, let's say, an objective truth to this. Given the experiences of the 1990s, because I think your presentation was more about the supply side still, about these ideological framings, the networks, but not so much on the demand side. And I think the demand side maybe has something to do with what materially happened in the 90s and with neoliberalism. So I just would be interested in this direction.
Agnieszka?
Yes, thank you so much. I was wondering about the NGOs, the ultra-conservative NGOs that you talked about. Who supports them financially? Where do they get their money from? How is that something that's transnational as well, where we can retrace who is connected to what and with what interests? And my next question would connect to that. I was very astonished when I read your paper about the Brussels from Ebola, about these dramatic transnational networks that even you have like a cult of rhetorics that repeat themselves in different countries, and it really frightened me to read this paper. And I was wondering if you could evolve a little bit on how this interconnectedness works, like how does this transnational entanglement happen? Are there like seminars where you would like learn the rhetorics? What efforts are made to sort of transpond it to different countries, etc. So knowing how does this international interconnected work? And my third question, you talk a lot about fear and how emotionalized this is, and we see in your presentation that the arguments are so emotional. It's hard to argument with logic against this rhetoric. So what would be your answer to how to fight politically against this? Is there also a transnational movement? We see now the whole parliament, the left has entered into the parliament, etc. How do we answer to that?
Thank you so much. So I guess I'll start with the money because it's the easiest. We don't really know because, for example, Ordo Iuris Foundation, they have 6 million zloty per year, but they do not publicize where it comes from. It's the same with the World Congress of Families and others. So obviously there are investigative journalists who are trying to uncover that, like Klementyna Suchanov, for example. And obviously there is a Russian money, there is money from a Mexican billionaire, there is a Brazilian sect which is very powerful and which was established in the 60s. So in a way it sounds like conspiracy theory, but apparently it can be true. So in that sense, and obviously, I mean, if you look at this now, for example, in the Polish context, and this the same happens in Hungary and in Italy when Salvini was in power, a lot of money has been poured into those organizations. For example, the organization which was behind opposing the equality march in Białystok, which I talked about, they got 700,000 Polish zloty as a part of a program for supporting civil society. So, I mean, there has been a huge redirection of the ways in which civil society has been supported in the Polish context, for example. We have new institutions and so on, and quite a lot of those organizations get money officially through official channels directed to civil society, but at the same time, quite a lot of them get money from, for example, a fund for supporting victims of violence, which is managed by the Ministry of Justice. And they distributed it to chosen organizations, mostly ultra-conservative ones. So in that sense, I mean, they have access to money now. Although on a transnational level, we have a lot of strange, wealthy people there. For example, at the Verona Congress, there were a couple of aristocrats. Someone called them zombie aristocrats. This kind of, old von Turnen, blah, 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 who have tons of money, and they are obviously supporting them. So it's quite interesting, I would really love to see someone who have really tools to get into this issue and show the money flows, because I think it's really important. But to the question of this ultra-conservative discourse as the last frontier of social solidarity, this really depends on the context, because this idea came to me when I was doing this book on rebellious parents, and I was reading, for example, about Russian or Ukrainian parental organizations, which are ultra-conservative, which are opposing sex education in schools, but at the same time, they are providing support for multiple families. They are organizing, summer schools for poor children. They are organizing networks to buy, washing machine to a family where there is none. So in the same sense, they are really like the mega churches in the United States, right? In a country where social security system is crumbling or non-existent, those organizations and those networks become a real supporters of security, right? But of course, the question is, wow, what about other people? There has been a study done in Poland recently where they asked people what are they afraid most. And they had, I think, a criteria of 10 things. It turns out that young men in Poland are afraid of gender and LGBT movements the most. More than climate change, more than crumbling health security system, more than the possibility for polexit. They are the most afraid of that. And another group in which that was the first, the most feared issue was older people who are among the, so the young men in Poland are the supporters of ultra right-wing groups and parties which now finally came into the parliament, like Confederation. And the older people are the ones who support law and justice. So in that sense, it is not only about material experience, but it's also about the fear of losing status and power, of deprivation, actual or relative, of fear of experiencing a change which we do not really foresee or want. So in that sense, of course, there is a lot of discussion about, you know, gender and masculinity, and there is this idea that, you know, men are afraid because they will lose their masculinity, whatever that means. But if you think about material aspect of demographic changes, these are profound. Recent research shows that in Poland, 60% of men up to 30 are single. Only 35% of women. So that means that those young women have partners who are older. And that means that actually quite a lot of young men in many countries, in the United States you have the incels, for example, as the sort of most horrible expression of this trend, who don't have the sexual life they expect, don't have the possibility to find a partner, and probably won't be able to become fathers. And that means that it's really an experience of the world in which, you know, your expectations as to how the world should work are crumbling in front of your eyes. So this is a very, it's not only cultural, it's not only emotional, it's also about, you know, the very material, tangible, embodied experiences that quite big groups have today. And then, of course, the question is, where is the place for voicing those concerns? Because quite frankly, I think that, well, feminism is not doing that as well. I mean, of course, the question is, can feminism do things for women and men at the same time? And maybe men should do it themselves, right? So like have this kind of, you know, progressive movement and find their place in the world which is changing. But obviously, there is quite a lot of relative deprivation, cultural change, experiences of the world which is not very much understandable anymore. And then, of course, the question of how those transnational networks spread their work. Well, I guess because I've been doing research on civil society for quite a long time, and in this book that we wrote with Kerstin Jakobsson, we said, like, why would we expect that civil society will be always following, you know, values such as equality, pluralism, solidarity, and so on? There is also quite a lot of organizations, non-governmental organizations, movement, and so on, which are basically ultra-conservative, anti-pluralist, and so on and so forth, which we didn't study really, because we expect that, especially in countries such as Poland, that it will just wither away. You know, there is democracy, we will be much better at that with time, and of course we will have this good civil society predominantly. So basically those organizations function as all civil society groups. They have their networks, they organize seminars, they produce books, they produce knowledge, they disseminate it, they go to international arenas such as UN meeting in Nairobi now, the usual stuff, right? They do everything basically what we do, and they have their own public intellectuals like Gabrielle Kubi. Have you heard about her? It's quite interesting because she's German and she's a sociologist, but she's not well known in Germany, but she is touring Poland, Croatia, and other countries as this kind of star because she wrote a book, what's called Global Sexual Revolution. Yes, and I mean, she is an intellectual celebrity, right? So they have their own authorities. And how to counteract it? I think that we forgot about the fact that, I mean, we know it and we doesn't know it. And we don't know it, in a way. It's like we need facts, but we also need emotions which will carry those facts, which will change the ways in which we know things, not only as a part of, let's say, social movement environment, but also as a part of doing science. And I really like Claire Hemming's approach to that, when she says that emotions change the ways in which we know. It's not only what we know changes our feelings for something, but also emotions change the ways in which we sort of see the world. And in the Polish context, when I analyzed the mobilization against the abortion ban, it was very interesting because Osteuropa-Institut and those ultra-conservative organizations, they have appropriated the language of human rights to a large extent. They are talking about the fact that they are protecting women, they are protecting minorities, they are working for the betterment of the society, and they are the true protectors of human rights. So they adopted that. And it was quite interesting what the women's movement did. The women's movement actually came back to the basics of feminist knowledge, embodied emotional knowledge about our experiences. So they started to talk, well, if this law will be implemented, women with horrible diseases might not be treated by the doctors. They will die. We know that because we know other countries, such as Nicaragua, where those laws are implemented. And this is, I mean, the ultimate end of that result is death and suffering of innumerable number of women and also whole families. And they were talking about their own experiences in gynecologists, for example, how horrible it can be, and that they cannot trust the state to really support them. They need really laws which would be good and protecting women, and they also need practices that will be based on women's experiences. So they actually, it's not new. This is how the feminist movement actually changed the ways in which science functions, in a way, to really, and also patients' movements, if we think about medicine, to really think about our embodied experiences as something that is a source of knowledge, and that this knowledge is legitimate, that it should be seen as legitimate, that emotions are not clouding our view of the world, but they are telling us something important. They're really a source of understanding the world better. So in that sense, I think that we have at our disposal very good tools to counteract this language and counteract this attempts, and not by abstract language and abstract, at least to some extent, values, but rather by coming back to our own experience, to our embodied experience, to emotions as legitimate in a public space, to solidarity, to understanding, empathy. And I guess that this is something that really made this mobilization so great. And actually Polish women managed, through this great mobilization, to stop this legislation.
Yeah, may I? I was a bit astonished that after talking about failure of feminism, that the answer to this question is about emotion. I see the point, But shouldn't we also talk about social policy and economic policy? Because this is part of this counter movement, which is, as you pointed out, also a counter movement to neoliberalism in a specific way with some combinations. But it's not just social policy, but it's also economic policy with a huge variation between different actors. So I'm not so sure if emotion is enough. New concepts, especially in a post-Soviet and East European space, the importance of social policy, I think, is something which was downplayed. Yeah. So this was more a comment. My question is, you often have another comment. If family is, so to speak, the last resort of solidarity, in my impression is that this is heavily linked to nationalism. So that why is the crisis of family a problem, ideological and also for politicians? Because the reproduction of the own nation is endangered. So we have and I also think for many people is this conception of nation is important and heavily linked to family. So these are, so to speak, flip sides of the same coin. Yeah. But my question actually is why you have also often used conservatism. Why you don't look at, when this is actually a self-description, they often in the self-description they often call themselves conservative. Not ultra-conservative, but conservative. So why are you not using this concept a bit more?
Yes, I guess the problem is that what I am talking about, the types of movement that I'm talking about, even if they self-describe themselves as conservative movements, very often they are much more radical in a way than the usual conservatives. So in that sense, I really don't want this misunderstanding here, because if you look at the Polish context, the traditional conservatists are really few that are left standing. You have either right-wing populists or ultra-conservative movements, which are really, they're basically, you know, they want us to come back to the Middle Ages, or the right-wing neocons, neoliberals. So you don't really have anymore this kind of, you know, I would say traditional conservatists who actually pay attention to the stability of the state, who respected institutions. And of course we have, you know, there are a lot of discussions around these definitions, just like with liberalism. But I guess I want to make this distinction, that this is different type of conservatism that we had, I don't know, in the 80s or early 90s even.
I wouldn't question this.
Yeah.
If there are no further questions, I would stop here and thank you very much for coming for the discussion, and thank you very much for
Thank you so
being
much. Here. Thank you.